Hey, geez, I'm about to do. Because what a neat little place. This one you placed, dude. The drinks are cheap. Like,
So this is the range setup. We have 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500 meters. So this is as good a time as any to start talking about these scopes and what makes all four of these basically identical scopes as far as build construction goes completely different. So here we're watching the view through the 10X, SWFA, fixed power, blah, 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 blah. We're going through the entire range here, which I had already pointed out. Goes from 100 to 500 yards. Goes with the paper targets at 100, the chickens at 200, the now boars at 300. Soon to be, I believe, the turkeys at 400. Yeah, those are turkeys. They might look like big blobs, but no, those are turkeys. Note the very small targets to the left and right of the turkeys. I believe those are 4 inches on the left and 2 inches on the right. At 400 yards, it's a hell of a shot. And then all the way out to 500 yards where we have this big ram. Again, you can note the small targets on either side. So it's actually not 500 yards, it's 500 meters to this target. And both targets to left and right, as you'll note there, are the same as they were for, I believe, the turkeys. I think all the steel targets, actually. So again, we start at 100, going out to 2. I made sure to adjust the parallax setting at every target, and the reason why I zoomed in on the camera for this was to ensure that I had everything in focus. Also, take note how quickly I can get from target to target here. It's quite simple. I'm looking completely through the camera setup at this, going from one place to the other. I'm not eyeballing it out any other way, so it would be very similar to if you were behind the rifle and just looking down it. Very, very quick to see. You have very wide field of view while you're panning across a big field like this, and that is basically down to the fact that you're at a lower magnification scope. This is only 12x. Not a huge difference between the 10 and the 12 as far as overall magnification goes, but whether it's better or worse in field work like that is entirely up to you. So for this, I decided to mute the rest of the tracks from here because the last two for the 16 and the 20x got a bit messy when it came to audio recording. There's just way too much gunfire. Again, here we are at the 16x, and it's still fairly quick to pan from side to side, but it's definitely getting a little bit more difficult to figure out where the targets are. And I did film these in order from 10 to 20x. Boars, again, you can see all the smaller targets on either side. If you haven't noticed by now, the 16x, in my opinion, has the best colors and the best contrast. It's very sharp as well. It's by far the sharpest of all of the scopes here. And we're going back out to 500 meters. One last quick check. You can see someone trying to take a shot. You can see, I don't know if you noticed, but at 12 o'clock, just above the ram, you saw the dirt kick up. And here's where you start to run into the issue of having too high a magnification for field work. Now, I've been doing this course for about an hour or so at this point. I know where everything is, and it's basically muscle memory at that point, but I'm still trying to make sure I don't overshoot the targets as far as getting them in view. And the 20x is very, very zoomed in by comparison, and it does take a little bit of extra time to figure out where I am and to make sure that I'm not overshooting where I'm trying to get to. So that's something to take into consideration. Another thing, the 20x, though though we are in there, we're out there. I mean, 20x is pretty damn powerful as far as magnification goes. The color contrast and the sharpness of the image itself starts to diminish ever so slightly, and you can start seeing a lot of chromatic aberration. Like right there's a good shot. You can see the cross horizontal bar. It starts getting that purple fringing. That's chromatic aberration. That's just the way the lenses work. It bends light awkwardly. Again, I think you'll probably see it around here. Not that much, but I have a good picture representation that we'll get to in a little bit. Here we start our eye box test. We're starting here with the 10x at a 45-yard marker on the concrete wall. Note that we can move side to side and in and out, up and down, and we still have a pretty clear image looking downrange. You will note as we go higher and higher in magnification, this will become tighter and tighter and tighter. Picture it like you're looking through a straw. The bigger the straw, the easier it is to see through the other end of it, whereas the narrower the straw, the more difficult it is. You have to be much more lined up to see through it. The 12x is a little bit tighter than the 10x. Not a huge margin, but it's noticeable. When you're looking behind these one after the other, it really does make a difference. The 16 that we're showing up right now is no exception. It's still gradually tighter than the 12x and marginally tighter than the 10x. And this is still fairly forgiving. You see you have a little bit of play side to side, up and down. This is what a very important cheek weld is for, making sure that you get lined up each and every time down the scope. And you'll note here on the 20x, it is very tight. And this is just one of the consequences of having a higher magnification scope. The higher you go up, typically the tighter the eye box becomes, the more difficult it is to look downrange. So keep that in mind. Here we are looking through the 10x, and what I like about this is we have 3 different distances, all covered in the same view. So those power lines are at about 30 meters, the tree line is about 50 meters, and that power tower way off in the distance is about 800 meters according to Google Earth. What I really like about the 10x is, of course, the field of view, which you can only get with running a lower magnification scope, but you could still make out all those pylons on that tower very clearly. Color is very good, and so is the contrast. Everything's excellent. Jumping up to the 12x, you still have a decent field of view. It does take a little bit longer to focus this scope for whatever reason. I believe I mentioned in my unboxing video that the ocular housing, for whatever reason, just doesn't seem as crisp as with the other 3. So I will be emailing SWFA as soon as I'm done with this full review and seeing if I could send it in for a checkup. But once you get it honed in, it's still just as sharp as, well, it's almost as sharp as the 10x, I'll say. The 16 is when you'll start to notice a little bit of color fringing at the very extremes, and you'll also note that we have lost a lot of the field of view. Jumping from the 12 to the 16, the 4x, it's a big enough difference that you'll notice that, especially when you're trying to take a tight shot like this. Everything is still razor sharp with the 16. I don't know what it is. It's got to be something to do with the glass, or the way of the construction, but it just seems so nice. It's also a lot shorter. The body of the 16 is about a ½ inch or so shorter than it is with the other 3. Now, of course, 20x, you can only see the 2 lines as opposed to the 3 that were there, but once you get it in focus, again, it's nice and sharp, still letting in tons of light. There's no real loss of light when you go up to the higher magnification of the 20x versus the 10x. It gets a little darker, but it's not to the point where it's a make or break situation. but again, razor sharp, and you could really check the contrast between all those very complicated tubes in the background. So that was midday. This is about twilight, about 5 o'clock Eastern Standard, mid-November, and it started to get real cloudy. So this is a real good comparison to show what kind of light transfer and contrast we'll have in the exact same setup, the exact same day. That was the 10x. This is the 12. It is getting pretty dark, but you could still make out everything nice and sharp. Shooting this late in the evening, even if you were hunting, is going to be a risky bit ordeal anyway. Again, this is the 16x, still very sharp, and when you focus on that power tower, you really tell with the higher magnification just how nice it is. Now with the 20x, you'd expect to lose a lot more light considering how powerful it is, but this is the real nice thing about having a fixed power scope. You have fewer moving parts, and thus all the things inside could allow more, all the lenses could allow more light to come through, and you could really make it out with this. It's not pitch black outside, but you'd be driving with your headlights on for sure. Using them in broad daylight in the middle of a bright sunny day or twilight's all fine and dandy, but what about a situation like this where it's pitch black outside and you're focusing on a very bright subject? You can still see that there's plenty of contrast and there's good brightness. The reticle is still very easily recognized, and you don't have to worry so much about having too many dark spots, because even the shadows are still pretty bright and usable. This is the 12x, and the 16x, you'll note, gets a little bit darker, and that's only because there's only so much you could really hope for a $300 optic working in an extreme environment such as this, where you have pitch black to oncoming bright lights like this. But as far as how the lenses deal with the light, there's almost no issues. I mean, you could see a little bit of flaring going on right there, but that's about as bad as it ever gets. So, but before I do my final thoughts on tabletop, I wanted to show you a side-by-side comparison of all of the reticles and what they look like. Now, these are the mil quad reticles, and fortunately, SWFA is smart enough to put mil turrets with mil reticles. They're all rear focus. It would typically be where you'd find your magnification adjustment on most typical scopes. There is only one side focus model available, and that's the 10x. That's going to be coming in a later review. As far as the rear focus, there's no real issue with it. It doesn't seem to be impossibly slow, but it's definitely not as fast as a side focus. So looking at the four reticles, they're all the same thickness, so you don't have to worry about an issue as far as on some first focal plane scopes, when you're zoomed all the way back and you have the largest field of view, the reticle is very finite and very, very vague sometimes, and when you zoom in, it gets much thicker. That's one of the problems with the first focal plane scope as opposed to a second focal plane scope, where the reticle will maintain its size and usually be a little bit finer, especially at the higher magnifications. Here, it's already as fine as it's going to get, which is really nice, because if you're worried about going with the higher magnification, you do not necessarily have to worry about having your crosshair be too thick for shooting at very fine targets. If you go back to the beginning of this video at 50 meters, all those holes are from a 22 LR. So you can really pick them up with a 10x just fine, but with the 20x, you really don't even need a spotting scope out to distances of, I would say, at least 200 yards. Maybe not 200 yards, at least 100 yards for a 22 caliber round, which is really nice. Here shows you a really good comparison of what the contrast and the brightness and colors and everything will look side by side. Now, all of these were filmed with the exact same settings on the camera within a half hour of one another. No clouds in the sky at the time, and you can see that between the 10, the 12, and the 16, everything looks pretty uniform and even. It's at the 20x when you start to notice that the colors are slightly different, the contrast isn't as sharp as with the other three, and it has a little bit more haze to it, it looks like. You could also really start to see the color fringing going on there with the purple coming up on the very foreground on the power cables. But overall, it's still a pretty nice image. But for me, the 20x is just a little bit too much, and I'm gonna touch on that right now on the tabletop and give you my final thoughts. So what are we left with? We are left with four very high quality scopes that I feel, for the price, should not be ignored by anybody. These typically run $300 year round, but thankfully with Black Friday coming right around the corner, SWFA put these scopes on sale for roughly $270, which might not sound like it's a huge savings. It's only 10%. But they include nice things such as these rings, which I believe they sell for around $20, $25, a bubble level, and last year they included a sunshade, which I don't have on any of these, and I think it was a really cheap chintzy magazine loader. I don't know why. It was a Butler Creek magazine loader for pistols, which I end up throwing away. But still, nevertheless, you're not only saving $30, you're also getting a nice pair of rings, which if you don't know anything about these, check out my review on them. This is probably my favorite, but I'm going to get there in just a second. Another nice thing I really like about these, and your mileage may vary, but these are all made in Japan. And at least for me, that means something. It's just really nice to know that you're getting not only a very inexpensive scope, but a very high quality one with Japanese glass and Japanese construction and build quality. And it really does show. For me, and what I plan on using these scopes for, well, I'll give you a bit of a rundown. The 12X is going to get sold because it's not enough of what the 10X is, but not enough of what the 16X is. The 20X, the shortcomings are the really tight eye box and the slight hindrance and loss of contrast and color. Not only that, but I don't like being too far zoomed in when I'm shooting. I tend to focus at that point too much on the reticle and how much the gun is moving, and less on the target and the fundamentals of shooting, such as trigger control, breathing, all that stuff. So the 20X for me is out. The 16X is by far the nicest as far as contrast, color, and clarity go. No doubt about it. This is going to be going on a more target-focused 22LR in the future, so I'm not going to get rid of this. That's going to be staying, and this is going to be staying. So the 12 and the 20X, at least for me, are going to be going, and the reason for that is they just don't fit what I want. Now, you might want the 12 and the 20. You're not going to be disappointed. All four of these are amazing. They're great quality. SWFA, as far as I know, has great quality control as well and great quality assurance. The customer service, from everything I've seen, has been top-notch, and I hope to find that out with the 12X in another couple of weeks. But definitely keep an eye out for the sale. It's going to be happening on Thursday at midnight, and can't recommend these enough. Thank you very much for watching. Have a happy Thanksgiving.